Welcome to episode 8 of the Ironwood Strength Show. Raw, unscripted, and unedited. Today I'm going to be going over GPP. This is, I think it's kind of a topic that a lot of people misinterpret or apply labels to that probably aren't appropriate as far as what it actually is. So I'm going to hit some of that stuff first, and then I'm going to go into what GPP actually is. Kind of put out some of my references for this one. I probably made this too complicated in my head, and I've had trouble thinking about exactly what to say. But it's really not that complicated of a thing, but it's a very important topic for both sports training and or powerlifting, weightlifting, strongman, whatever you want to, whatever endeavor or whatever you're pursuing. GPP, it creates your foundation of all the work you do, or it should if you're doing it right. So some of my references that I've been really kind of relying on, of course, Louis Simmons is always in there. Pretty much all of his work. I can't specify any one piece of work. I look back at my notes from a seminar that he did back in 2005 that I was at. Yuri Verkhoshansky, Programming Organization Training, and the other big one that I really drew a lot from was Thomas Kurtz, his book Science of Sports Training, which is probably one of the top books that I've read in regards to sports training. Very comprehensive, lots of information, specific information as well as general information, and something you can really get a lot out of. I'll throw in another one that I probably will hit on a little bit. That's an article that I wrote several years ago for Elite FTS entitled "Do Powerlifters Need Cardio?" So I'll hit a few things off of that. But those are probably the primary references that I have. And there's a lot of places you can get. And I missed one. There's another one right here. Sorry, I've got notes everywhere. A System of Multi-Year Training and Weightlifting by Alexei Medvedev. Also had some good information. Really kind of just defined what GPP was. So, a lot of what people will say, is GPP is sled dragging. Okay, if you're familiar with West Side Barbell. No, that's not what GPP is. That you could use sled dragging as part of your GPP, or you may utilize it for all of your GPP, just depending upon how you train, but you cannot define, GPP is not defined by sled dragging, okay? Sled dragging does not define GPP, vice versa, however you want to look at it. Circuits, not GPP, can be used as GPP, but in and of themselves, it's not GPP. If it was, CrossFit would be nothing but GPP, but as we know, there are CrossFit competitions, which means there is a specific element. So that training is really specialized and specific to what CrossFit is, what the competition is, which means you need to find other means to develop the GPP for that sport. What's another one? A good one is we were at when I was coaching at UTEP. We came back from football one afternoon or evening. We had been on the practice field, and we came back to the weight room, and our weight room overlooked the game field. And our game field, unfortunately, was actually a public facility, so a lot of people could come in there and train or do workouts, which they loved running stadiums, or which was actually a pretty good workout, and it was a great facility for it. We had very high, a very high stadium with continuous stairs. So, but anyway, we came back from that workout on the field, and we looked down on the game field, and someone was doing bear crawls. I don't know who the person was. I don't know why they were doing them, but they were doing bear crawls. And the assistant coach standing next to me said, oh, it looks like someone's doing GPP work. And at first thought, I think a lot of people would say, oh, yeah, that's right, they're doing GPP work because it's body weight. Well, body weight doesn't make it GPP. And so my first comment was, how do you know? He goes, well, they're doing body weight exercise. Well, that doesn't mean anything. That's just a body weight exercise. What if they're competing in a bear crawl competition? You know, if they're competing in a bear crawl competition, they're doing sport-specific work. They're doing competitive exercise work. So, and my point that I was trying to make to him was that you can't have GPP without having a specific. So if you're someone that just likes fitness and you just like to go out and do workouts, kind of whatever your purpose is with that, GPP kind of gets tossed to the side. Now, if you have specific goals that you're trying to accomplish, then GPP is actually defined by those goals. So GPP for a soccer player would be defined by what is needed for that soccer player in a game. The same for powerlifting, where you have a squat, bench, and a deadlift. That is the specific. Okay. Let's say bench press. That is the specific. So the specifics here. Now we know as we move away. Remember that continuum I talked about last time. As we move away, it becomes more specialized. And the further away we get, the more generalized it becomes. Well, that's where your GPP is. Your GPP is down the continuum. Okay? And you can't have the general. You have no idea what the general would be unless you know what the specific is. So it's really important to know what the specific elements that you're trying to train, what the competitive exercises are, what the special exercises are, and from there, the general exercises will be determined based off what you need that isn't fulfilled by the competitive and special exercises. Okay. I'm gonna go to, that's kind of what it's not. It's not just the simple one thing. You have to look at what you're trying to accomplish in relation to the actual competitive exercise, and that will define what you need to do or what you need to accomplish for GPP, and what you need to accomplish will determine what exercises and what nature of exercises that you will use. So, like I said, I've got notes everywhere. I'm going to pull from some of those. All right, this is according to Medvedev. This is kind of what the definition. It's not really. It's more the role of GPP. Let me flip through some of these things. And I was not the most, like I said, I made this too complicated in my own head. And that has created issues for me. I've struggled with doing this all day long, and yesterday, and the week before, and anyway. Not that one either. Okay, so we're just going to go with what GPP is trying to accomplish. The role of GPP, according to Medvedev, in training, the role of GPP in training is it forms, strengthens, or restores the habits or skills which play an auxiliary or facilitatory role in sport perfectioning. Okay, so it's going to utilize the abilities that aren't necessarily specific, but it's going to strengthen those abilities. So you might be, even for like a shot putter, there's a certain amount of aerobic development or cardiac development that they need. And GPP will help develop that base. Okay, and then they can draw from that to to train the abilities that they need, which would be alactic power, an alactic, um, strength, maximum power, maximum strength. They need those needs, but they need the aerobic and the cardiac development in order to develop that more efficiently. Okay, so it's basically preparing them to train the way that they need to train. It's also another role is that it's developed. It improves the abilities that are developed insufficiently by the sport. Basically, what I was just saying, by raising the general work capacity, and that's where I think a lot of people want to do this circuits, and not that that can't be, not that that's a bad thing. It just needs to be done properly or done. With fitting the needs that it actually needs to fit. It can't just be a random circuit. Okay. Another role is it's a form of active rest, which assists the restoration processes after significant special loading and counteracting the monotony of training. Basically, what that means, and this I'm kind of reading basically straight out of Medvedev's stuff. It might be slightly off, but basically it helps with recovery. Okay, and when you have long periods of training, 5, 6, 7 weeks, which I don't know that a 7 week block of training, that's starting to really get out there. But anyway, it's going to break that. You can use it to break that up. So after a long period of training, you need to recover from that. The body needs to recover from that, and you can utilize GPP methods to help you do that. Okay, and I'm going to get more into that hopefully as I go. And I'm taking from a lot of notes here, like I've already said, but that's kind of the role of GPP in layman's terms. This is how I would always describe it to interns or people that I was talking to about GPP in the simplest way possible. GPP is being in shape to train for and compete in your chosen sport. So if you're a power lifter, you need to be in good enough shape to where you can train for and compete. And there are specific demands of training, and in order to get to the competition, that you have to go through pretty hard training. You get to the competition, and it's a whole nother set of training things, and I might hit on that a little bit later to give you a more specific idea, but you have to prepare both for the training and the competition. The same thing with football. It's not, your practice should prepare you for the game, but there's going to be other elements in there that maybe you can solve with your GPP training that helps you prepare for a little bit more for the game. But you also have to be prepared for practice. There's some sports that the practice or the training is more difficult than the actual game day. So you need to be prepared to handle practice. One of the things I remember Jen Wendler talking about this, that if you had a football coach that was going to demand that you do X, Y, and Z in practice, and you can look at it from a very educated strength coach way and be like, why do they have them do this? I'm not going to develop my strength workouts and my conditioning workouts to help with that. I'm trying to train him for the game, and he's doing all this crazy stuff. Well, you better prepare him for practice, because they spend a lot more time in practice than they do in the game. And that was Windler's point. If they're going to have to do it in practice, you better prepare them for that. Your job as a strength coach is to prepare them, to prepare their bodies. That's what general GPP is, general physical preparedness. So they have to be prepared. And that, from a strength coach perspective, you have to train them to be prepared for practice and for training just as much as you do for the game. Okay, and that needs to be kept in perspective, because if you only train for the game, but they have all these crazy demands at practice, they may be having all their injuries in practice, and it could be prevented by the strength coach addressing those needs in training. Okay. So now I'm going to try to go through some of my notes. This could be, towards the end, I'll get into a little bit more of the how-to and how to apply some of this stuff. Not entirely. I'm not going to go through all the different elements of what you need to have. It's really not that complicated, but I do want to hit some of these bullet points. Most of this will come out of Thomas Kurtz's stuff, and this is kind of getting into the why of GPP and of why we need to do it. And I think it's an extremely important element of training that gets overlooked. A lot of people don't want to do it. It seems too simple. It's boring sometimes. But there's ways, if you're creative, there's ways to make it more interesting. And that's more speaking along the lines of a powerlifter or a weightlifter. Understand that for a football player, a soccer player, a baseball player, when you take them into the weight room, almost everything you do is GPP. When you take them on the field to do speed work, agility work, the way most coaches do it, conditioning, the way most coaches do it, that's GPP, okay? General physical preparedness. It is not directly tied to the sport, but it's building up the abilities that we need for that specialized and specific training. That's why it's considered GPP. Think of it this way. Everyone wants to bench for football. And we know, as strength coaches, we know bench pressing is not specific to football, okay? And the same with, we try to make cleans specific. No, the cleans aren't specific either. The day that I see during a football game that they take a barbell out to midfield, out to the 50-yard line, and have someone start doing cleans or bench press, then I'll say that lifting is a special exercise for football or a specific exercise for football. It's not. It's a general exercise used to develop the abilities that those athletes will use in specialized or specific training. Okay, the specialized training is much more similar to football. It's all the drills that they do. Okay, it's much more specific along those lines. And then the specific or the competitive training is their scrimmaging, or mock games, if you want. Some coaches will call it that. But we need to keep that separate. GPP is this end of the spectrum. Competitive and specific is this end of the spectrum. Special is everything in the middle. Most of what we do as strength coaches is on the general end. Now, I have written articles about conditioning. I've talked to many people about agility work. Those things can become more specialized if you know how to apply them. Quit having them run around cones. Cones are good, but we can do better as far as developing the athlete. And that moves over into the special area. Anyway, I got a little bit off topic, but those are important points. Those are important points regarding GPP and the categorization of exercise, GPP, SPP, SSP. Okay, so these are some of the things that Thomas Kurtz has pointed out. Like I said, I got a lot of my notes from him. He's got a ton of information in his book, Science of Sports Training. And these are things that GPP accomplishes, or the roles that it performs. One, develop the whole body in order to withstand further specialization. So, and I might go kind of back and forth on some of these. You don't just want to, a lot of sport coaches want you to do sport-specific training. They only want you to train in the weight room or in your speed and agility workouts. They only want you to train what they're going to be utilizing, what the athletes will be utilizing in the sport. That's not what we want to do, okay? We want to build the entire body. And that's a form of GPP. That's what we're trying to do with GPP, is build the entire body. That way it will allow us to, what he says, withstand further specialization. In other words, we don't want it to break down when we get to the specific stuff because we only do certain things. We need to develop maybe the antagonists to those muscle groups that we overuse, or develop the joints by creating stronger connective tissue. We need to prepare the entire body. Um, GPP is a form of active rest. Your main workouts are going to have a major toll on the body. They should, if you're training properly. That's going to be very stressful on the body. Training should be hard. Okay, it should be very hard. So we need to recover from that. GPP is a means of doing that. GPP is a means of aiding recovery. Okay, by providing blood flow, providing oxygen into the blood, it allows us to recover better. GPP allows for specialization, or specialization is based on a foundation of general development. So that goes into what I was saying before. We want to develop the entire body in a general manner, which will allow us to further specialize. So if you go back and look at some of what the Russians used to do with, the sport training was very important back in Russia, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, extremely important because they felt that a stronger body equaled a stronger nation, or a stronger sports system would display the strength of their nation. So it was very important to them. So they started at a very young age, and a lot of they would take children, and they would have them master body weight exercises, and then they would have to master different types of games, and then from there they started specializing from there. But they developed them based off those very simple means, and they developed from there. But they had to develop those and master those simple means first. General exercises are used to ensure all-around development of physical abilities. We don't just want to develop, I used the example of a shot putter earlier. We don't only want to develop maximum strength and maximum power. We need to develop their aerobic system, their cardiovascular system as well. Now, that does not mean we need to have them running 3 or 4 miles to satisfy those needs. There are other ways to do that are more beneficial for that shot putter. You don't want to take a 250, 275, 300-pound shot putter and have them go jogging long distances. That not only is it going to be detrimental to what they're trying to accomplish, it also is going to set them up for injuries, because their body probably isn't developed enough to withstand forces, the amount of repeated forces that they're going to have with every step. And that's besides the point that long distance running is not a good way of conditioning for most sports. And that brings up another point. People are trying to lose weight. You got someone that weighs 300 pounds and they want to lose weight, and they're going to say, I'm going to start running tomorrow. No, don't do that. Okay, it's absolutely the wrong thing to do. And I am getting off topic here, but you're running yourself into problems. Start out by walking. Walk for 15 minutes. Once walking for 15 minutes becomes a little bit starting to become easier, then you go for 20, then 25. And as your weight comes off, your body is becoming more developed to handle different stresses. You can start with a light jog for 5 minutes and then proceed. And then, but anyway, that's way off of GPP. Endurance exercises result in increased speed of recovery. So when we're looking at GPP, a lot of times we're thinking a little bit more on the endurance side. It doesn't have to be that, but a lot of times we are, and they do increase speed of recovery. Why? I think I've already mentioned that. Increased blood flow, increased oxygen count into the blood. That will help with your recovery as you go through training. All right, sport-specific exercises cause weaknesses to develop. If you only do the exercises that are specific to the sport, you will only develop, to a large degree, the exercises that are needed for that sport and for the movements that are performed in that sport. This will show up um, blatantly show up in sports like throwing, in sports like powerlifting, weightlifting. It'll definitely show up there because you can completely leave out certain muscle groups, or nearly completely leave out. And that's not good, because that's going to start creating imbalances as you train. Another area I can think of is golf. All they do is swing one direction and then they walk with their bag. So they really get overdeveloped to one side. And we need to counteract that in training by training the other side. I remember a talk about from those baseball strength coaches at a conference that I went to, and some of them talked about how they wouldn't do any rotational exercises at all because they did so much hitting and throwing. They didn't want any rotational exercises in their workouts because they already did too much. So they would do stabilization exercises, more static type exercises to counteract that. Some of the coaches had another idea that they would count the swings. I'm talking Major League Baseball strength coaches here. They would count the swings. So if a guy in batting practice had, 40, 50 swings, when he came into the weight room, he was going to do the same number of rotations going the opposite direction and not train the direction that he does when he swings a bat. Okay, and what they're trying to do, which makes a lot of sense to me, although I disagree with too much rotation, but they're trying to counteract the stresses of the sport. Okay, they're trying to counteract that to keep that athlete healthy. Okay, they don't need to train, and this is where you get off. I remember I had a softball coach always wanted me to do rotation with their softball players. I was like, we don't want to do rotation. They do too much already in your practice. I'm not condemning her practice, but they already do a lot of rotation. We already have an issue with we already have issues with back injuries. We don't want to feed those issues. We need to stabilize the spine, not continuing to turn in the direction that they're turning too much of already. Okay, rotation's not good, so we want to counteract that. That's where GPP comes in. And that's exactly what I was just talking about. Sports-specific exercises cause weaknesses to develop. We don't need to feed that. We need to prevent those weaknesses from developing. And that's why his point there was that's why general exercise should be performed concurrently throughout the competitive season, because they're doing so much then. You need to continue to do your GPP work during the season to prevent those weaknesses from developing. Additional workouts can be performed. Again, this is Thomas Kurtz. He's talking about increasing the effect of the main workout by delaying or increasing supercompensation, speeding up recovery, which is something I already talked about, realizing additional tasks. So, and he's talking about doing this through extra workouts or additional workouts above sport practice, above maybe the main workouts that you have for them, as really, in my opinion, it should be part of it, but the workouts that you have as a strength coach. Realizing additional tasks would be such as flexibility or the cardiac development that they maybe don't have a specific time to do. We still need to get those things in. Also, realizing additional tasks of that are important during specific stages of training. So this, to me, goes directly to what Louis Simmons was trying to do at Westside Barbell with GPP training, which he wanted to do extra workouts. He's talked about that many times. His idea, he always talked about doing 10 workouts a week. Really, I remember him saying that you would start, if you've never done GPP training and you have 4 main workouts a week, you're going to add 2 workouts to that. One exercise to help with your lower body or with your squat and deadlift, 1 extra workout to help with your bench. And those were light workouts, high reps. An extra workout for the bench may be a few sets of band pushdowns, maybe an extra 100 reps, 2 sets of 50, a set of 100, 3 sets of 30 or something like that, to getting a lot of blood flow into the into the elbow and strengthening the connective tissues around that elbow, the tendons, the tricep tendons, and that's such a thing. For your legs, maybe 100 rep band good mornings, for the hamstrings and for the hip joint. And other things you could do is additional stretching workouts. I used to do that when I trained, that I would spend time in the evening, so I would have my 4 main workouts. I would have an extra workout on Tuesday, more cardiac oriented, lower body, an extra workout on Thursday that was more cardiac. Maybe I'd focus a little bit more upper body stuff. But then in the evenings, I would do a flexibility session. I'd do that before I went to bed. Sit down 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes at most, and just go through a variety of stretches. And it helps with the relaxation. It helps prevent loss of range of motion as you develop tightness and tension from your heavy training. So reasons, I've already hit on this, reasons to do it: improve strength of connective tissues, prevent strength imbalances, which I've talked about, or correct strength imbalances, to improve overall health. For rehab and prehab, that's prevent injuries, or recover from minor injuries. It's important to work those. If you're a soccer player, number 1 injury is going to be knees. Number 2 is going to be ankles. Believe it or not, when I worked with soccer, number 3 was the shoulder. So we need to be doing exercises to strengthen those joints and to protect those joints. Any sport that I worked with that had a high incidence of knee injuries was going to do TKEs prior to many of their workouts, or low box heel touches prior to many of their workouts. Sports with a lot of shoulder injuries, rotator cuff work, scap stabilization work, things that we're probably not going to spend a lot of time on in the main workout, but we need to get those things in to improve overall health. Other things that need to be done is probably some extra cardio. And I'm not necessarily cardio as a lot of people think about it. This will be a topic that I hit in the future of how to perform cardio and what the purpose of it is and why we shouldn't call it cardio. Anyway, that's another conversation, but it will be related to this. It's related to GPP for a lot of sports. Aerobic fitness permits doing more work of anaerobic nature by limiting the size of the oxygen debt and speeding up its elimination. So as oxygen accumulates in the muscles, oh man, this is probably going to get this wrong, but I'm going to try. That basically creates the lactate or the lactic acid that we all hate so much, and we want to remove that. So if we have a higher level of aerobic fitness, we can prevent that from happening, or it I probably said all that wrong. By having a higher level of aerobic fitness, it prevents that lactic acid from accumulating. Okay. And it speeds up the elimination of the lactate, so then you don't have that weakness or fatigue or burning sensation that causes more fatigue. So if we don't have enough aerobic work in our training, there are a number of things that can go wrong, and that's what I have listed here next, is that not enough aerobic training causes physical and mental fatigue. So we want to limit that, especially for athletes. We want them to be fresh, especially at the college level, because they have a lot of other things just besides sports. They have a lot of academics that they have to take care of. But it also hinders their performance, being mentally and physically fatigued. Not enough aerobic work causes you to crave stimulants or sweets, which we don't need to have in our system. It increases the chance of becoming injured. It increases the chance of becoming sick. If you notice, I'm kind of hitting a lot of the things that go along with overtraining. High aerobic, adequate level of aerobic development can help prevent that overtraining when you're dealing with, a lot of heavy workouts, a lot of intense workouts through your sport. A better level of aerobic training can prevent that. Difficulty waking up in the morning. Need more aerobic training. And this is GPP. Again, I'm saying aerobic training, but I'm talking about GPP. There's different ways of accomplishing it. It's not just about running long distances. We need to get that out of our vocabulary. Gaining fat or not losing fat. You need to have an adequate level of aerobic or GPP training. Just a couple more things. I'm going to get into some of the things that we should actually be trying to do in our GPP workouts. One, general endurance prepares the athlete for faster acquisition of sport-specific endurance. So, our good sport-specific endurance utilizes the movements or similar movements to the sport and the specific abilities, trains it in the same way with the specific abilities that it's utilized in the sport. So, conditioning for football. Can we create exercises that mimic the sport and utilize not just the physical demands of the sport, not just the movements of the sport, but the same energy demands of the sport? So running for 20, 30 seconds does not do that. And I would not recommend those higher sprint times. But we need to have something of longer term endurance sort of work that helps us prepare those abilities so that we can transfer that ability to the more sport specific stuff. Okay, so and I think that to me is where I put 20 seconds as the absolute limit lengthwise, and shorter recovery times such as running hundreds, 110s. To me that's where I create my base, and then I move into the more specific stuff the closer I get to the season, the last few weeks before the season. And I have another article about this. I forget the name of it. Let's see if I can pull that up real quick. It is on EliteFTS.com, talking about conditioning for athletes and being more specific. Coaching factors, getting started. Position demand conditioning, and I don't know if they changed the name of that or not. But it came out in 2019, and it was published on EliteFTS.com. It talked about getting into the actual demands of the sport. But prior to doing that, we need to develop the base, and that, I feel, is more of your standard conditioning from 40 yards to 100 yards or 110 yards of sprints with shorter rest intervals, 30 to 40 seconds probably for a 110, maybe 20 seconds for a 40, 15 seconds for a 40 maybe. And then you get into your more specific conditioning with specific rest intervals going into the season. Okay, general endurance training improves health and speeds up recovery after anaerobic training. I've already mentioned that at least once, maybe twice, and that is extremely important. And that's what we're trying to do with GPP, is improve health and speed up recovery. It's one of the basic tenets that we're trying to accomplish. General endurance training helps the overall development of the athlete. I hit on that too, so I'm going to move on. Okay, these are some of the First, this is something by, I believe it's Medvedev. It is. And he listed some of the general prep exercises recommended for weightlifters. And this is going to throw you. Okay, this is going to get away from things that we generally talk about. The first one he mentions is, this is for weightlifters: snatch and clean and jerk. All right. The first one he mentions is track and field exercises. This is not surprising, except, and this is a little bit older. I think we've kind of moved on from this, and this might not be the best way, especially for an experienced weightlifter. But it's something that I think is, you kind of need to wrap your head around it and say, oh, that's how much different GPP can be. But he talks about using track exercises, runs from 400 to 1,000 meters for a weightlifter. 1,000 meters is a long ways for a weightlifter. 400 is a long ways. That goes from, probably for a weightlifter, all the way up to a minute. Okay, 1,000 meters is going to be quite a bit more. Different jumping exercises. This is, again, track and field. Throwing exercises. Actually going out and throwing a hammer, discus shot, tossing kettlebells, and even backwards cross-country running for 1 to 3 kilometers. Okay, this to me is a bit extreme, and I wouldn't include this in GPP, but this is something that is talked about in those old Russian texts. Gymnastic exercises, acrobatics, sport games. This is for a weightlifter. Going out and playing, he has it listed: volleyball, basketball, soccer. Those are the 3 sports that he listed. Different games from those sports. Mobility games, cycling, rowing, swimming. Different winter sports such as skiing and skating, or even hiking. And some of those things I'd agree with hiking for sure. Okay, the getting outside has a profound effect on your emotional state, your mental state, and actually would improve your aerobic fitness at probably a lower level of it's escaped me right now. Below anaerobic threshold. That's what I'm trying to think of. It would keep them below anaerobic threshold, which would be outstanding for improving their overall fitness level. So things that I have, and some of those are way off, and I would hesitate to recommend them for a weightlifter. But it's hard to argue with some of the history that goes behind that. So I think knowing when to put it in would be important, and maybe being cautious on who you utilize it with and the timing compared to when they're probably not doing this close to a competition. Okay, it's probably way out from a competition, or maybe right after a competition. I can see different benefits there from the mental state, especially getting them away from the rigorous every day in the gym type of training. And this kind of goes to, the mental state of the overall mentality of the lifter. And I remember Louis Simmons talking about that too. You have to train the mentality. Some lifters and athletes want a lot of variety in their training, or else they get emotionally or mentally bored with their training, and the training becomes not as productive. Some are very much more straight-lined and focused, and they need the same type of stimulus all the time. I can't remember his name. There used to be a guy that wrote for Elite FTS, and he was very regimented with his program, and it was very strict. You're going to squat, bench, you're going to deadlift, not a ton of assistance work. You're going to do that on Monday, and then on Wednesday you're going to squat, bench, and deadlift, and on Friday you're going to squat, bench, and deadlift, and on Sunday you're going to squat, bench, and deadlift, and none of the 3 board presses, none of the crazy bars, specialty bars. Just squat, bench, and deadlift, and you follow specific set and rep parameters. So that's going to training the mentality of the lifter. Training like that is probably going to have a very high need for a lot of variety in the GPP to solve the imbalances that could be created from that. Anyway, I'm going to move on some of the how-to stuff. And this is stuff that I've done, and I don't remember seeing it in a book, but going through my notes, there it is. Looking back at Westside, that's the same type of stuff that Louis would talk about doing for GPP. He talks about strengthening the connective tissues, and Thomas Kurtz recommends 2 sets of 30. One, to improve the blood supply to those connective tissues, which result in stronger tendons and ligaments. 2 sets of 30. I do that stuff all the time. Probably not enough. I need to probably hit different joints doing it versus just what I've been doing. To relieve muscle spasms, doing sets of 100. I used to do that for my pecs. I used to get a lot of pec strains, and maybe looking back on it, maybe they were actually just spasms that I was thinking were a strain. Doing a couple of 1 or 2 sets of 100 on bench press would typically solve those issues fairly quickly. What does that do? Gets a ton of blood flow in there and helps you recover. Developing aerobic endurance, you want to train below anaerobic threshold. And I think that's very important. When you start to go above anaerobic threshold, this is thinking more along the lines of your strength development. Even for athletes, I've heard people talk about this at some conferences. You want to develop aerobic endurance by staying below anaerobic threshold. That may seem too easy. When you calculate it and you train by heart rate, that may seem too easy. But it is actually the best way to prevent. You can do cardio in that manner, and it will prevent the strength loss that everyone wants to say, oh, cardio makes you weaker. Well, no, not if you do it properly. If you do it blindly and go out and kill yourself doing cardio, yes, it is going to hinder your strength gains or your speed gains. But if you do it properly, you stay below anaerobic threshold, you can actually get faster and get stronger while continuing to do that type of cardio work, or cardiac development work is what I would call it. And you can get more information on that from a practical standpoint from my article. It's on EliteFTS.com. It's called Do Powerlifters Need Cardio? Other things with GPP, you know, sled dragging is great. Circuits can be good if they're not overdone. Again, a circuit can be just as bad as cardio if you overdo it and you're just taking someone in and killing them. The work for GPP is probably going to be on the lighter side, but very high volume, and you're not going to fatigue yourself it's not like going and doing a hard set of 15 or 20 and being on the floor afterwards. Okay, you're going to be able to walk away from it. Okay, you should be able to walk away from it just fine. Apply it by adding in extra workouts. Short, 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, you can get up to half an hour, or maybe a little bit longer later. Maybe get some work on the things that you don't always get in. For athletes, it is what strength coaches do most of the time. Your weight training, your speed training, your conditioning. Unless you really curtail that to the sport, most people do not, even though they think they do. When you really look at the specifics, they don't. It's still GPP. Okay, they're still working GPP because they're just training the general abilities needed for the sport. I'm going to stop it there. If you have any questions, please let me know. Put them in the comments. If you do like what you see, please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel, and please share this with your friends or coaches that you know that may be interested in it. Until next time, this is the Ironwood Strength Show, and I will see you later.